George, I thought you were on vacation. Gotcha. I caught you.
There we go. I'm challenged. Yes, I am on vacation, if you call moving and remodeling a vacation.
Hi, George.
Hello there. Voila, neighbor.
Long time no see.
It has been too long.
Are you not walking your dog anymore?
I usually come through that one.
No.
Sorry.
I do. It's usually 3 of them.
I don't see you anymore.
It's the timing, I suppose.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
We're going to start again. We lost our sound here. So the March 11th, 2021 Whatcom County Planning Commission meeting is called to order. And I'll call the roll. Robert Bartell.
Here.
Kelvin Barton, that's me. I'm here. Commissioner Desmani.
Here.
Jim Hansen.
Here.
Stephen Jackson. Stephen Jackson.
He's not on the list.
Kimberly Lund.
Here.
John Mayberry.
Here.
Natalie McClendon.
Natalie just texted me and said she's not feeling well. So I'll send her. Everybody says, we hope you feel better.
And Dominic Mosseri.
Here.
Okay. All right, please join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
With liberty and justice for all.
justice for all. So it's time for department update. Mark Rosonius, would you give us a department update?
Good afternoon, good evening, commissioners, I should say. Happy Thursday. I don't have just a brief update for you. George, nice to see you. I don't get to see you very often anymore.
It's a shame. Mark.
Just wanted to bring you guys up to speed with council activities. The council considered the PC recommendation to invoke an emergency moratorium on accepting new applications for outdoor marijuana growing and processing applications. They took that up this week on Tuesday, and they had an executive session with their legal counsel. And after that, they chose to take no action. And I think the concern was about the use of the emergency moratorium action. So at this point, they've taken no action on that on your motion. However, as I mentioned previously, the item of the review and to review and revise the marijuana regulations is already docketed by council at their previous meeting. So it will come back to you on our docket as well. In addition, the particular operation that was the subject and the focus of the public comments you guys received in the last several weeks has been served by PDS with a notice of violation, and corrective actions indicated will be addressed during their subsequent permitting process. So I just wanted to give you an update on that in terms of status on that. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that, and Cliff will talk about it in more detail when he talks, but my understanding is, I guess we've set a hard date for you guys for your public hearing on the S&P update for April 22nd. And that, and again, Cliff will get into more detail on this, but that has to be a joint hearing with this process with the Department of Ecology. And so that's when they were available to be able to have that. So Cliff will give you more information on that, but that's what I've got for you anyway. And if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Commissioner Desmani, I see you have a question.
Yes. So, Mark, just a clarification. Could you give a further explanation of the notice of violation?
So we went out and inspected the property along with representatives from the Department of Ecology and the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board, and we got a tour of the property and discovered some violations of their current grow operation. And so we've indicated that was the notice of violation in order to correct, and we'll address those as a part of this current application they have to do processing.
Are you at liberty to explain what those violations were?
Well, the violations were about that they were growing in the barn and they weren't supposed to be growing in the existing barn. And there was a violation regarding clearing activity to put in pads for hoop houses that they needed to get what's called a land disturbance permit for. So we'll wrap those things into the review of the current permit proposal.
Were issues about the amount of coverage that the folks in the community raised, were those addressed?
My understanding was they were looked at and discussed with the Liquor and Cannabis Board, but they're not a subject of our permit per se. So that's really an item for the Liquor and Cannabis Board to comment on.
Did the council receive the public comments that we got at the Planning Commission?
They got a lot. They also got comments at their public meeting in the afternoon on Tuesday, at their committee of the whole meeting. When they considered your motion, they got several comments from marijuana growers as well as folks.
Did they get comments from the community?
I think there was one person who commented from the community in the afternoon, and then there were more folks who commented at the evening meeting during the open session. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other questions for Director Personius? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to open session for public comment. If you're joining us from your computer, you can click the raise your hand button, but if you're on your phone, *9 will raise your hand if anyone would like to speak under open session for public comment. Right. Give it a moment here to make sure it comes through. All right, seeing none, let's move on to commissioner comments. Are there any commissioners that have comments? Commissioner Desmani.
I just wanted to follow up on the marijuana issue. Folks from the community did contact me over the last week. First is prior to the council meeting, and they were disappointed about a few things. One is that the members of the council didn't get the comments that we saw, and that it appeared that council members interpreted that the moratorium request would affect current operations. So Ben Ellenboss brought 3 people, commercial growers from the county who mistakenly believed that this proposal was going to actually have a negative impact on current operations and current permitted activity. And then the third disappointment that they expressed was that Tyler Bird, who is the county council member responsible for that district, who I've reached out on a couple of occasions, who did finally respond to comments from the community, subsequently was not present at the council meeting to speak in favor of his constituents. So I just wanted to share that for the record.
Commissioner Hanson.
I'd like to report that I had a extended conversation with Ed Miller from Miller Environmental and discussing some of the issues we may be deciding on tonight.
Thank you. And I wanted to let you know that I took part in a workshop on public hearings and open session for public comment. So it's public comment and then public hearings. And it was interesting. I think we do things pretty well, but there's some things that might make it flow even better. And I'll share those with Tammy, our planning commission coordinator, and she could pass out a couple of things that maybe we could try to implement. Okay, no other commissioners with public comment. Let's move on to approval of minutes. February 11th and February 25th minutes. We have a motion to approve one or both of them.
I'll make a motion to approve the February 11, 2020 minutes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Right, so is that Commissioner Jackson?
Mayberry.
Oh, Mayberry? Can you guys, I just want to check, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, I'm seeing the nods. All right. Is there any discussion or correction on the minutes? Okay. Tammy, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmonte,
Yes,
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Abstain.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
Okay, that is 6 yeses, 1 abstaining. So it passes.
And then February 25th, do we have a motion to approve February 25th?
I'll move to approve.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Are there any corrections or discussions on the February 25th meeting minutes? Hearing none, Tammy, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmonte,
Yes,
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
Okay, 7-0, that passes.
Okay. So now it's for our agenda for the night is working again on the shoreline management plan updates. And we have several people here. Of course, Cliff Strong from Whatcom County staff, Ryan Erickson, who's now with San Juan County, but worked on this project. And then they have invited a couple of guests that are going to answer some questions for us. And I will give it over to Cliff Strong and he can introduce the guests.
Yes, sure, thank you. But first, I do want to go over the schedule that Mark indicated. We've changed a little because Chad's not going to be available on March 8th. We have had to schedule that your hearing for the 22nd. And I'm kind of, just trying to guess how much people will get through on this. I think we'll probably take tonight and next meeting on the SMP, but should be done with it by then. So we have 2 other non-SMP related things for April 8th, and that would be the open space applications for 2019 and the public participation program. Now, if after tonight we feel that you're going to need 3 meetings before the hearing, then we can rearrange that, but just trying to keep you busy. Now, with that said, you guys have asked, there were 2 issues we were talking about. One was the manure holding facilities. And some folks have suggested that we don't allow ponds in the shoreline jurisdiction. Others saying that, no, that was the old type ponds. The new ones are much better and don't have as many problems. But none of us really knew anything about it. So you asked if we could find somebody who did. So that's why I've asked George, and he's corralled Chris Clark from NRSC to come and speak about those and answer any questions you might have. And then afterwards, Paula Harris, our lead in the flood division of Public Works, you guys had some questions about, you know, how their projects materialize, what kind of things they end up doing or needing out of this code, but also how the floodway, floodplain, and the CMZ are determined. So she'll have a short presentation. I've asked them all to keep the presentations fairly short, and mostly for questions from you guys in discussion. So with that, I'm ready to turn it over to George for now.
Good evening, commissioners. Yeah, I'm George Boggs with the Whatcom Conservation District. Just completed my 23rd year and will continue till the end of June. So a short timer. During this time, I've had a lot of opportunity to be around the discussions concerning conservation practices. However, my knowledge and experience pales in comparison to Chris Clark. Chris Clark was longtime engineer for the Whatcom Conservation District, who recently went to work for USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. Chris, lots of experience in researching these structures, designing the structures, watching them being constructed, examining them after they've been built, and so is well placed if you have questions relative to their function and significance between maybe the modern structures, which are the steel uprights, versus the earthen lagoons. So I would defer to Chris to respond to any technical questions relative to those structures there and their performance.
Clifford?
Chris, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I think their basic question, what they're trying to wrestle with is, are these things safe along shorelines? The earthen ponds, or should they be the tower type things? So
the question for safety, there's a number of variables, but looking at what they're designed to do is to store manure until it can be applied appropriately. And the size of the storage needs depends on the farm. And so as the farms have grown or over the years, the larger volumes that they do store is needed. Using smaller containment vessels, we've just outgrown them. So going to larger structures, the design criteria has improved over the years. There's been standard changes, but also the utilization of just on-site materials have kind of went away, and we've started importing heavier clays that are meeting the standards, but also way more so that they are more protective than the older containment structures. The new steel upright tanks that are out there, they still have some challenges with designs for in the floodway kind of projects where we have to design them around buoyancy uplift forces. So there's still a lot that goes into them, and it just depends on site specific conditions on which containment structures better, more economical. But as far as protecting the surface and groundwater, I'd say they're both equal for surface water. For groundwater, there's been discussions over the years on things like permeability rates, when we start getting into that level of detail in the design, the minimal amount of permeability, or the very, very small permeability rate that we designed these to, while we're building them, we're actually exceeding that design criteria due to how they're installed. The laboratory analysis and then in place compaction testing indicates that we're getting even a higher degree of sealing than what previously, or what they're designed to. So as far as groundwater goes, that I believe that putting in storage structures is much more safer and protective than not having enough storage and having producers apply either too early or too late into the season for runoff, but also for groundwater issues, because if you don't apply when the plants are growing, those issues are multiplied by the acres that they're applying to. So
Chris, we have a couple of questions from commissioners. Commissioner Jasmani, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Adi. I believe, Chris, thank you for your comments. I would like to get your expert opinion on the following question, because I believe the key issue that's being addressed is whether the code should specify the method of storage. Is your opinion that we should not specify the method, that we shouldn't designate whether it's a tank or a containment lagoon?
correct. I would not want that specified, because there may be situations where one is better than the other. And for variable different reasons. There's a number of
That's what I
reasons.
thought you said. I just wanted to make sure.
Right. Thank you. Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Chris, I was just curious on the permeability ratings. What is the requirement for, I say, a clay lined lagoon?
1 times 10 to the centimeters per second. Before, if you don't meet that, then you have to go to a clay or different liner. But that also doesn't take into account the sealing properties of manure. So that rate is what is tested for on a laboratory bench, where they put vacuum against a soil sample that's been compacted to standard Proctor. When we're in the field, we're hitting higher than that standard Proctor value. So, but the standard is 1 times 10 to the minus 6th centimeters per second.
Okay. pretty slow then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Hanson, go ahead.
Well, thanks a lot for coming here to help inform us on these issues. I personally am not supportive of specifying which of these storage methods should be used. But what I'd like to ask you about is a couple of related things, and it's confusing to me where county regulations apply and where the CAFO regulations apply. But what I'm concerned about is the capacity, not the nature of the lagoon, if it's in a critical area, because we know that in the middle of winter, when the storage need is the greatest, that we're not supposed to be taking the manure slurry out and spreading it on the fields. And so my concern is, do the CAFO rules and do our rules require enough excess capacity to make sure that if they're meeting the fullest need of the dairy farmer, and then there's a big winter storm, that they're not going to overflow? That's my first question.
So the design capacity is dependent on where and how they can apply based on crops and soil types.
And the
And
number
I
of a
would say
cow?
that it takes that cow number into account, but it's also taking in the rainfall and leaving a freeboard so that if we do get a storm, even when they are full, that they would have the capacity to not overtop. But the timing of application and the volumes that they can apply leads into how large of a facility they can build or need to build. And then
Thank you. That's reassuring. But which leads me to the second question. When you talk about the phenomenon of spreading too early when the grass or the corn or whatever is being spread on isn't growing, so I understand that's in violation of the regulation. So you seem to indicate that this is happening. I've seen it happen. What is our situation here with enforcement, and what should be happening with enforcement?
my opinion on enforcement for that there are a number of regulatory agencies and entities in the county, in Whatcom County, that are supposed to oversee that part. And they've operated at different degrees of success over the years, and we've seen results of that. We've also seen when they weren't able to do that for different reasons. So I believe that if there is a strong enforcement presence, then we do see water quality benefits.
Thank you.
George Boggs, I think you have a question or comment there. Please go ahead.
Yes, I'm, as the manager, I participate in the PIC managers group, which has representatives from, again, the county with natural resources, planning development services, Department of Agriculture, county health, and the Department of Ecology. And so there's a lot of coordination. We meet bi-monthly to discuss these and coordinate as well. Field staff meet more frequently than that. So the Department of Agriculture is the one whose principal responsibility is for the dairy nutrient for the dairies, and ecology for the non-dairies. There is there's an interlocal agreement or a memorandum between the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Ecology to coordinate the oversight of livestock facilities that have had a discharge or have sought protection under a CAFO, confined animal feeding operation permit. And so there's that. So those are the entities whose primary jurisdiction responsibility are for those major livestock operations. And there's a great deal of coordination with them in their oversight and regulation and inspection.
Thank you, George. Cliff, do you want to go ahead and continue?
Well, sure. So I just wanted to make sure that the Planning Commission felt they got enough information so that you can individually vote on any motions that come up or address the comments we've received. Or was there anything else from these two fine gentlemen that you needed to hear?
We have a Commissioner Lund. Would you go ahead?
I was just going to say, perhaps you might want to talk to Chris about the other regulations that when these things are cited, that they have to go through. Again, there's those federal as well. So it's not just the counties concerned about their citing, but the federal and in the floodways and so forth. So that may be of interest to talk about that level of oversight that comes into play in the siting and installing these facilities.
Commissioner Lund, you had your hand up a bit ago and got lowered.
this has all been very helpful. It sounds like we have a lot of oversight and coordination happening. I'm just curious if either Chris or George want to speak to how often do we have discharge events? What is the frequency at which we kind of have spillage or an exception to the norm? Can anyone quantify how often that happens?
I think you're talking with regard to overtopping because they've exceeded their capability. And so I think Chris' observations would be helpful in that regard. I think what we found, and just going back for the last 20 plus years, there used to be 283 dairies when I started. Now there's less than 100. And so you're seeing in this contraction and those who are continuing in the business, a greater sophistication and resources relative to the management. And with the oversight that, again, the Department of Agriculture is providing, you see the timely application, you see, so again, that these are functioning. I'm not aware of any overtopping or discharge in recent memory. There was, it's been a long time ago when there were some questions, and they had, before the producers were really paying attention to keeping the fresh water out from rainfall, getting the manure out in a timely fashion, and in the rhythm of operating these things as designed and following that. So Chris could probably share any observations relative to that, but discharges from overtopping lagoons or lagoon failure, I don't have any that I can relate in recent memory.
Chris, do you want to weigh in on that, please?
The number or the amount is, I would say there are some that are overtopping due to mismanagement more frequently than we'd like. And some of those have been abandoned totally from regulatory oversight because they're no longer in business. And they may not be receiving manure anymore, but just the rainwater itself can load these up. And that actually speaks towards the efficacy of the liners holding the water out or inside. But the overtopping of a lagoon, it has occurred, especially during high rainfall years, or just when the rainfall comes in a time when it wasn't expected to last as long. So when we've had a longer streak of wet weather, even later than this in the spring, when there may have been dry periods earlier, but they weren't taken advantage of. But the total number of overtopping, I would say, has come down because of fewer dairies, but also because of better management and because we have spent a lot of time in technical assistance and financial assistance putting more storage into farms, so that number of that's been happening has been reduced. But it does occur, and that's where there is a need for more storage in the area.
All right, thank you. Cliff, do you want to continue, or maybe?
Well, I think if the commission's done with these two gentlemen, we could say goodnight to them. I don't think they want to hang out with you all night, but.
Commissioners, are there more questions for George and Chris? Okay. Thank you, George. Thank you, Chris. We appreciate you coming on tonight.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your service and the work you do. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, then next we're going to move on to Paula. You guys had some questions about how they operate, how they do their projects, but also how floodway, floodplain, and channel migration zone are kind of determined. So I've asked her to do a short bit about that and then answer any questions you guys might have.
Thanks, Cliff. I am Paula Harris. I manage Whatcom County's River and Flood Division, and we do the good work of the Whatcom County Flood Control Zone District. I wasn't quite sure what you guys were looking for here, so I put together a real short presentation on kind of the types of projects, a couple projects that we're working on right now, and if that would be helpful, I could run that through that real quickly and just give you a flavor for the work we're getting ready to do. I know you guys are working on a shoreline management update, and I have a meeting scheduled with Cliff and Ryan next week to kind of talk about some of the specific language and the details of things. But
and Paula, if I can interrupt. So Paula just raised that there might be some text amendments that we may need to do to the language we've shown you. So either at one of your meetings, if not at the hearing, there may be a few changes to that section.
And I think most of them are pretty minor, but
yeah.
So if you guys want, I can share my screen and go through a little quick PowerPoint on a couple projects just to give you a flavor of how river and flood is approaching floodplain management and flood hazard reduction in the realm of the world we live in today, which certainly considers fish. Does that sound good?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. There you go. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is a site where basically out in between Everson and Linden, and you can kind of get a little bit of a flavor of the river here, where in the upper half of this reach, you have a wider corridor where the river can access and flood and erode into. And then right around here, it gets kind of pinched down into this single thread river. We're in the middle of this FLIP planning process. We call it FLIP. It's floodplain integrated planning. And it's really trying to look at flood issues, farm issues, and fish issues all at the same time. So we're generating a lot of technical work in terms of hydraulics, as well as fish habitat, sediment management, as well as just understanding what the land uses in the area are. So we've had an issue that came out of the system-wide improvement framework, which was a 3-year planning process that we went through to try and address deficiencies that the Army Corps of Engineers had identified with our levees. But more recently, we've had some erosion in this one area where we're trying to focus in the next year. So we've kind of combined these two problems into one project. Here's a aerial. This shows you that erosion site, and right behind that erosion, it's kind of hard to see on this image, but there is a levee and then a roadway right behind it. The swift deficiency is upstream of that, and that's basically a spot where the levee kind of peters out. It doesn't have that nice levee geometry with a 10-foot crest and back slope. It's just like a little mound. So that doesn't meet the Corps' their standards, and it doesn't really tie into high ground. So this is kind of a 2-part project. But we're really focusing on this erosion site for the near term, because if we don't, we could lose the levee and the road. So this is just a historic photo that kind of shows before the erosion, and then back when the river was hot on that part of the levee where it's really just a bump along the road. So there's the erosion site and the swift deficiency. This site, let me just back up here. This is that constriction I talked about. And you can see this wide kind of corridor where there is actually a lot of sediment storage that is temporal in nature. It comes and it goes. And you can see that in this map. So what this is the USGS did a couple-year study where they actually went and compared bathymetry, which is just a survey of the river geometry, in 2006, and compared that to 2013. And what you're seeing on this is blue and red dots, and blue means the river is going deeper or incising. Red means the river's aggrading or depositing sediment. And the size of that bubble is, you can see in this key. So the big red bubbles are 2 to 3 feet of net aggradation, meaning it's getting filled with sediment. So just upstream of Everson, you can see a lot of these big red bubbles. And again, this was based in 2013. So given that big flood we had last year, I suspect that some of this stuff is starting to move downstream. That project site we were looking at is just in here. So you can see that a lot of that sediment is probably passing through this reach as we speak. But this is one of the reasons that we think that 2020 overflow at Everson was so large, because we really had a situation where there was a lack of channel capacity in this reach. You know, on the flip side, no pun intended with our process, but you can see that up here, there is channel incision in the Deming area. And we've done a lot of levee repair projects up here where the river's been incising and undermining that toe rock, and the rock slips down and we have to repair those revetments. So I think that the message on this slide is really that we have a river that is, its headwaters are in a volcano, and we have an enormous supply of sediment compared with most Puget Sound rivers, except for the Puyallup, which also has a volcano draining its headwaters. So we have huge inputs. We have a major sediment supply that comes through episodically. We're starting to learn that maybe some of this we can get a little bit predictive with what we see up at the North Fork. Like this plug of sediment was probably up at the North Fork gauge about 20 years ago. And in 25 years, it may be down here in Ferndale. So we're learning a lot, but it's still a challenge to manage a river that has this much change in its own cross-section geometry. So that was just for context, and just to let you know that, you know, part of our flood plan is to develop a sediment management strategy. It's not like we're going to run out and start pulling gravel out of the river, but I think it's a tool that we want to keep in our toolbox. I understand the protections that need to be in place, but we don't want to remove the ability to do that just carte blanche. So back to the Abbott site here now. So this is where our levee is. Back here you can see the road, and this is just monitoring results. So we have had, you know, initially this rock connected back here like you saw back in that one black and white image. And now we've been monitoring this over the years, and we're getting ready to do the first phase of this project, which the hard points are basically at the two ends of this embayment, and they're still intact. And we really want to protect those hard points so this embayment doesn't grow any deeper and target our levee in the road behind it. This is also, like I said, it was just upstream of that constriction where it's really a single thread river, and finally it opens up, and this is a spot where there's really limited habitat, but we have an opportunity to provide some habitat for all those fish coming up river. And we can also actually get a much quicker permit. We've actually got a blessing from WFW to use their habitat exemption process. So we're shooting to get this project constructed this summer. And this is the design that we've come up with. It's we kind of tailored it to fit that exemption. So it's not a continuous revetment. It's a bunch of these wood jacks at the downstream point, and then these habitat and bank roughening structures at the embayment and the upstream point. And it's basically just putting a lot of wood that's ballasted in there to help stabilize that bank. And really now this is actually becoming more of a slow water embayment. So it'll provide a lot of cover and real habitat for the fish as they come upstream, and hopefully hold the line on the bank so that our levee's still intact, and then we can come back in the next phase of work and address that swift deficiency upstream and take whatever other protective measures may be needed, if at all. So that's our Abbott project. The next one I just wanted to highlight really quickly was Truck Road. Truck Road, we've been out there numerous times over the year. That our latest project site is right here. You can see this river has a lot of room to migrate laterally. It also has this inflow of a lot of sediment coming in from the Middle Fork, which tends to be driving the river over next to Truck Road through here. So there's a nice forest patch that the river could utilize here, but it's choosing not to. And so it's ending up next to our road a lot more than we would like. Back in 2018, we got to the point where we lost a lot of the ground that was between the road and the river, got down to about 12 feet between the fog line and the river itself. So we actually conducted an emergency project in the middle of winter where we actually dug up this pavement here, used a trench box to install large rock to actually a big volume of large rock, so that if the river did encroach in there, it would self-launch and protect that toe of the river. So this is kind of in the middle of construction and then towards the end of construction, but you can see the river's right over here. This is that raw bank. So we did this project in 2018. We had a flood in 2020. the rock launched, and you can see it right here. That's that site. You can see the Jersey curbs. We're down to one lane here because there isn't much land left and we don't want people to drive into the river. We also, as part of that project, installed these woody hard points. And those were really intended to try and kick the river away from the road and the downstream property owner and just get it away from there and have it utilize some of this area across the way. This property has actually been red tagged by PDS because this erosion has gotten to about 12 feet of the house. We do have some potential opportunities where we may be able to acquire this and do some, we basically have to fix this now because we have a road down to one lane. So we're just about to go into this alternatives analysis where we're looking at different options where you could do some in-stream structures, extend riprap, maybe move the road over because we do have a wide right of way here. And potentially other options could include acquiring this property and doing some more of these woody structures out on this property. So maybe the river will never engage with the road in the future. And I just have a couple ground shots to kind of show you. This is after that 2020 flood and that house downstream. So that's just kind of an overview to give you the flavor of the work that we're working on. I can speak to the floodway issues if that would be helpful, or just basically open it up to you guys for questions at this point.
Do we have any questions for Paula? Commissioner Desmani.
So my question is about, so basically what you described is the efforts to battle the river when it endangers property or other assets. What other tools do we have at our disposal as the river tries to migrate in different directions besides just basically shoring up the boundaries, current boundaries of the river?
Well, through our flip planning process, we are trying to look more holistically at the river and look for opportunities where we might be able to set back levees. But when you get to that lower river, it really becomes challenging because the river's kind of on a hog's back. So there's kind of natural levees in place, and then you have the floodplain that's lower. So we built these little man-made levees on top of these natural levees. So once the channel starts migrating into that, you really lose that level of protection, and the whole floodplain becomes open to much more frequent flooding. That would certainly affect a lot of ag operations. Other tools in our box are acquisitions, and we typically target residences for acquisitions. The primary work we've been doing is down in Marietta at the Delta, where we purchased over half, probably 2/3 of the community since we started buying things out in 2001. But when it comes to channel migration, it's hard to actually get an acquisition done if a structure is being impacted. And, a lot of the agricultural land use, if channel migration is threatening their farmland, that's their business. So it's, and oftentimes there's just not a good pot of money that's available to buy out farmland because it's eroding.
So as follow-up, as the river becomes potentially more energetic due to climate-related changes, could it be that we're forestalling maybe bigger catastrophes down the road by dealing with, by creating barriers that will work for the near term, but over the long term might not work?
Well, I think that we are definitely incorporating climate change into our planning process. I mean, we are addressing the increase in peak flows. We're addressing those sediment wedges as they move through the system from a technical analysis standpoint as we do the modeling. But you got to remember that the Nooksack system is kind of unique. It's not like the Green River down there. Our levees overtop almost every year, sometimes several times a year. So they're really designed at an elevation, at least in the farmland portions, that they're designed to overtop during the winter time, but ideally provide that growing season flood protection. So, I think that we're actually a little bit better poised for climate change just because, we're not trying to keep all the water in between the levees. We know in the wintertime it's going to flood and it's going to access that huge floodplain that was formed by a glacier, not by the river itself. So it might get a little bit deeper in the floodplain, But our zoning is pretty appropriate in terms of mostly being ag zoning. We do have more and more of these ag short plats that are putting people in harm's way that may not be associated with agriculture. That's a whole nother can of worms I won't go down here. But I do think that we are thinking forward in our planning and our project development and the details of design. So I don't really think that we're setting ourselves up for that. I mean, a lot better than a lot of places.
Thank you. That helped a lot. That's a really important observation about also, I know it's not the focus today, but short plats in the ag zone.
Yeah, I'm figuring out how to get at that.
But yeah, thank you very much about the point about allowing for overflow in high water times. That's a really helpful point.
Commissioner Hanson.
Hi, howdy, neighbor.
Howdy, neighbor.
I think part of why people want you here is because there's some terms being used in some of the documents that we're dealing with that aren't clearly defined to people's satisfaction. And so it's hard for them to tell what the impact will be of decisions they make if they don't understand these terms. And in specific, what's the difference between the floodplain and the floodways, and that whole geomorphic phenomenon, and how the regulations apply differently to them.
Yeah, and that's a bit of a can of worms, because in Title 17, which is our flood damage prevention code, which is what we in the flood department administer, floodway means something different than I think the definition of floodway and shoreline. And Cliff, you can correct me if I'm wrong when I define this. But in my world, what a floodplain means is, we run a hydraulic model where we put in that 100-year flow at the upstream end, which our model is Deming. And that's based on statistical analysis of gauge flow. So we put in that 100-year flow, and basically that model simulates the water coming up in the river, spilling over the levees, filling up the floodplain, and then receding. And FEMA has really strict requirements on how you actually map a floodplain, I'll say. And if you got levees like we do, it's a little bit complicated, but basically they look at it without the levees in place because our levees overtop. So that's kind of, in a simple terms, how you determine what the floodplain limits are. From a Title 17 and an NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program, FEMA perspective, a floodway is that portion of the floodplain that you have to keep open to be able to convey the flows through there without making the water surface go up by 1 foot. So what we do is we take our hydraulic model, which has this big floodplain, and we start encroaching in on the sides until the water surface goes up 1 foot. And then where those encroachments end is where they got to that 1 foot surcharge is what we call the floodway. And it doesn't have any real physical meaning. It's a modeling thing that you create from a hydraulic model. I don't really like it, to be honest with you, but it's what the feds mandate to us. So it's what the regulations are all driven around in it. It really does have some, our state has imposed an additional requirement. Basically, if you do anything in the floodway, you can't increase flood elevations by more than 0.00 feet, which means like nothing. But our state has also imposed this additional regulation that says residential structures cannot be reconstructed or substantially improved, or new residences can't be built in the floodway. And that's that ag short plat thing that really comes into problems when people break off an acre with their little house, sell it off to somebody who's not farming, and there's no provisions. So if their house burns down, they can't rebuild it, which causes just heartache. I've seen it out on Hampton Road right now. But that's another thing. So that's kind of the difference between the flood code, floodplain and floodway. I think shorelines has a different definition of floodway, which
it's the latter one that you mentioned.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So does that help, Jim?
Yes. Other than the commissioners have been wanting to know if they can see a map as to where and potential people who potentially want to develop their property, if they can see a map to determine whether their property does lie in a floodway.
Absolutely. You can see the map that exists now, and we can even look at the maps that we are in the midst of a new mapping project with FEMA that's going to change all the lower Nooksack from Deming down. And we've been going round and round. It's been years. We started this in 2008 with them, but there is some new mapping that's they're still working through the processes with the communities. But we can at least preview what it might be in the future. So yeah, all you have to do is contact our office. Travis Balma and Jason Bueller from my office can field any of those questions. Yeah.
Are those the firm maps you're talking about, Paula?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so those are also online on our on PDS's websites.
And one other question is, if you're buying a piece of property and the title company does a title search, does the title company protect you from buying property in a floodway?
No, that's not on your title. You got to do your due diligence, and that's one of the biggest problems is people
get screwed. Yeah.
Commissioner Masseri, go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of touched on, but part of my confusion with dealing with the floodway is that in the SMP update that we're dealing with, we've got two definitions. In chapter 23 versus chapter 16, they both have different definitions. So previously in a meeting, we were discussing certain activity within the floodway, and I said, okay, can I get a visual of what the floodway is? But if I don't know how those two different definitions interact with each other. And then a second part to that would be how that relates to the FEMA maps and the different zones that they have, how our definition is reflected compared to theirs.
And I think that it surprised me when Cliff said that they were both the same, because I think there are two different definitions, and the floodway definition is not like an engineering definition. It's more of a geomorphic definition. I can't remember what it is, but I think you're right, Dominic. But the one in Title 17, which is where we regulate, we basically say if you're going to build a house in the floodplain, you have to elevate and put in vents and all that stuff. That's the one I define for you, where we encroach and get to a foot of surcharge. And what it's supposed to represent is that area of deep and fast flowing water. And in our new mapping, we're actually going to have floodways kind of down the river, and there will be some overflow corridors like out in Scott Ditch and those areas where, the water overtops the levee very shallowly, but, a ways away, it's like 10 feet deep. So there will be some like split floodways in our new mapping, but our old mapping, they just ignored the levees and they encroached from the outside. So there's just one floodway centered around the river. But
so the zone X500 that FEMA has, would that fall into our definition of floodway?
That's the 500-year floodway or the floodplain is just the additional lands that would be flooded beyond the 100-year event. But the floodway is only based on a 100-year flow when you encroach and get to 1 foot of surcharge.
Okay, so ours is the 100-year that FEMA has mapped.
Mm-hmm. They mapped the 500-year just for informational purposes. Go ahead, Cliff.
I just want to correct something, Paula. When I said it was the same, I was reading chapter 1616. So that's the one and the other one. So I just wanted to let the commission know that Paula and Ryan and I are going to meet next week to go over some of this stuff, and we will try to rectify those two definitions so we have one definition between the two chapters.
All right. Are there more questions for Paula, or Paula, do you have more for us?
I don't have any more unless, I'm just here to tell you what you want to hear.
I don't know if we can impose on you to hang around a little longer. I know we're going to get into a little bit of topic here in a few minutes, but if you could, that'd be great. Cliff, you want to go ahead and continue?
Well, after these two presentations, what I had lined up was to go over Commissioner Mayberry's proposed motions that were outlined in the memo. And Ryan and I responded to those. So it's up to the commission as to whether you want to go through those all individually, or how do you want to handle that?
Well, if we could hold for a minute, we had a motion to lay another motion on the table, waiting for Paula to come and speak, and wondering if we should bring that motion back up again first and get that out of the way. It was supposed to be brought up for last meeting, but we knew that we could get some additional information. And commissioners, would you like to get that out of the way right now while we have Paula here? And I believe that Commissioner Hansen made the motion, and it was to revise 3D of 2340-100 to add except in the floodways after the word mining. And then we had a motion to lay it on the table till we could get additional information. So commissioners, do you want to go ahead and take that up right now? Kind of need some, I'm seeing a head nod, yes. So Commissioner Hansen, that was your motion. Would you like to continue?
Well, sure, if I could just ask Paula if it's, whether or not it's just irrelevant.
What are we talking about here?
Mines in the floodway, whether they should be allowed to make strip mines in the floodway.
Strip mines?
Well, that's the kind of mining we have here, right?
Well, any. Well, I'm not. There's not too much mining going on in the floodplain these days, Jim.
Well, this part of the document about mineral extractions talked about the way it could be, allowing it to happen in the floodplain. Do you think there's too many restrictions for that to ever happen in the floodways anyway?
Well, I don't think, I honestly, I don't think that the old days of gravel removal where they just go back to a bar and scalp and scalp and scalp and come back a few years later is, I don't think that's ever going to come back. But I do think that we do have one of the largest inputs into Puget Sound of sediment. On a per drainage acre basis, it's like the top one or two. And our delta is growing at an alarming rate. So I think that there could be, we could get to the point where we want to do some side channel excavation and things that are actually removing gravel that would be driven and that gravel could be used by somebody. When we did a pilot project a few years ago to look at what it would take to be able to remove gravel from the river. And, I don't think the economic viability is really there anymore. I think since gravel mining was shut down back in the late 90s, most of the contractors have invested in upland pits. And what we were hearing from Han Coop when we were having those meetings a few years ago, you might have even been on my flood committee at that point in time, was that it wasn't economically viable. It was too dirty. They clean out all the sticks and logs and stuff. And unless, the county gave them a permit and everything that they needed and they could swoop in and swoop out, it really wasn't going to be viable. So I don't think that we should limit things just because we were scared. I think that we should make sure that if those activities are done, they're protective enough that we don't screw things up for habitat and fish. But I don't want to take our tools out of the box because we do have some different problems than most of Puget Sound has. And I just think we need to be surgical in terms of how we do things.
Yeah, we specifically left in gravel bar mining for constructive purposes, like you're talking about. But I was just thinking, well, what if someone's in the floodway, not in the primary floodplain necessarily, but someplace where you wouldn't be able to build a house? Would you be able to?
Well, but remember, we're going to have these overflow floodways too. That might be, 300 feet from the river, with some high ground in between. So the floodway is changing.
I'm not going to promote that amendment anymore, and thank you so much. But I do want to remind the commissioners that the sediment that makes it all the way to the bay is the fine sediment, not the gravel.
So Commissioner Hanson, you made the motion before that we just picked up off the table. Do you wish to withdraw your motion?
Yeah, I'd like to withdraw the motion.
Okay. And Commissioner Desmond, you made the second on that. Are you okay with the withdrawal of the motion?
Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The motion is withdrawn. Cliff, would you go ahead there? And I think that was the question I asked Paula, if she could hang around, because I knew we had to address this motion. You
don't need me anymore?
Possibly not, but this is a diverse group. But you're welcome if you'd like to spend the evening with.
I like to go eat my dinner, but.
Well, we appreciate you being here.
Okay, well, and Cliff knows how to get a hold of me if you have any follow-up stuff.
Misery loves company.
Okay, good night, guys.
Good night, Paul. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
All right, Cliff, go ahead.
All right, so then the next thing I have queued up is to talk about Commissioner Mayberry's proposed motions, and perhaps we should let him go through the list, or it's the council. I mean, it's your guys' choice. Like I said, we did provide written responses to all of them. I don't know if you want to talk about all of them or just certain ones, or whether Mr. Mayberry wants to withdraw all of this. I don't know. So.
Commissioner Mayberry.
No, I'd like to talk about them, and if we can go through them one at a time, I'd like to get Ed to at least give his reasoning. He's the one that brought these up. So if we're good with that, and should we get started?
We can. So.
All right, so I'm just gonna go right out and make first motion here. 16. I get the text on the screen.
Yeah, I'm getting there. 225D. 225. D. Oops, where'd it go? 225D. So we're under general regulations. And it was this one: in order to preserve native plant communities associated with marine, river, and lake shorelines and wetland mitigation wetlands mitigation sequencing shall be applied during site planning for uses and activities so that the design and location, oh, that's weird. Something else came up. So the design and location of the structure development minimizes native vegetation removal. Development uses or activities that require vegetation clearing shall be designed to avoid the following in order of preference. So this is basically say, if anything, keep your native trees, take out non-native vegetation, non-native trees, and leave these as best as possible.
Okay, so the motion was to replace associated wetlands, associated with marine, river, or lake shorelines and wetlands within designated critical areas and or buffers. If you want to highlight that on there.
Yeah, this part here, right?
Yeah, including associated. Sorry. And I think the concern, I may ask Ed to talk on this, but it doesn't seem specific that requires them to be within critical areas or their buffers. It just says associated with. I think someone could make the argument that even if they're not within the buffers, that they could still be associated with them. So that was the reason for the
I see.
For the motion. Is there a chance I could get Ed on here to probably say the same thing?
Yes, you can. Ed?
I'll second it just so that we have a motion in a second.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
We can.
Oh, good. Yeah, pretty much like John said, I think it's just for clarity in how you might read this. It's pretty general in the beginning part and just kind of referring to marine, river, lake, shorelines, and wetlands. Native, yeah. Oh, and it says associated with, so that can be pretty much anything. And then, when you go down into that section, to me, that says, so if someone has wetland buffers or whatever on their property, but they had an area of upland that's outside of everything, but there were trees, you could ask someone to move or avoid the trees, even though they're not inside critical areas. And I kind of looked at your guys' reasoning too, when you talked about the intent was that meant shorelines, but again, it doesn't really read that way. So I think that's the confusion. Does that make sense?
And Ryan has been waiting to weigh in here. Go ahead, Ryan.
I'd just like to add a little bit that this chapter is an overlay that only applies in critical areas and their buffers. So you can't apply this outside of that. I agree that it's a little bit, it could be reworded, but you can't extend it past the critical area or its buffer because this ordinance does not affect those areas. What it does also affect, though, is that this is adopted by reference by the Shoreline Master Program. And the Shoreline Master Program currently and as proposed will be managing the entire 200 feet of the shoreline jurisdiction. So it's not just the HCA area that this would apply to in the Shoreline Master Program, because we merge them together into one document. So that's leaning more towards why it's written this way. I just don't want to lose that when we modify the language.
I'm wondering if an acceptable change would be to read, in order to preserve native plant communities in marine, river, or lake shorelines and associated wetlands, because isn't that what the WAC actually talks about, is the wetlands associated with the shorelines?
Yeah, if we were just doing the shoreline jurisdiction, but this would include the critical area of its wetlands as well. So you could say wetlands and associated wetlands. But I mean, I understand that Ed's concerned about it being expanded, but technically this should not be applied outside of the 200-foot shoreline jurisdiction and the critical area or its buffers as defined by the GMA.
Well, I mean, if you just state that it would apply just to the shoreline, I think that's the confusion. It just says areas associated with marine, river, lake, shoreline, or wetlands. I mean, so yeah, I mean, if you just say within the shoreline, and the shoreline is defined as 200 feet and associated wetlands, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so.
I like that suggestion.
So within shoreline, just change this to read within shoreline jurisdiction. Everybody happy with that? Okay.
I'm seeing a thumbs up from Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah. It would be shoreline jurisdiction and critical areas and their buffers. Because it also applies outside the jurisdiction, but yeah.
I'm only seeing a couple commissioners on the screen, so I can't really get a feel for, is everybody fine with that? I got a thumbs up from Commissioner Mayberry, but.
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to see it on the screen and read it. But that was the purpose of the change, so.
Does it look right to you, Ryan?
Yeah, critical areas. Well, wetlands are critical areas.
Yeah.
Underneath the wetlands.
Yeah.
It'd be critical areas and their buffers.
Well, I'm confused because I thought we were, again, just talking about the shoreline jurisdiction. If we just throw out critical areas, now that's extending that outside of the shoreline jurisdiction again.
So, and I don't know, so we moved all of the protections that for ecological functions and from the shoreline program into the critical areas ordinance. And so it applies now, this applies to not just the critical areas and their buffers, but also to the shoreline jurisdictions and stuff by reference. So we have to review them together. And you'll look at the different sections of the, like the fish and wildlife habitat area. We have regulations now that are specific to the shoreline in that area as well. And so it needs to go hand in hand.
Boy, I'm not sure I followed that, but I mean, then the way it reads now, you can, so critical areas could just be any wetland or buffer outside of the shoreline. And so following that and reading this, you can have people alter development based on, you know, the type of vegetation outside of the shoreline. Is that the intent?
So this would apply. So in order to preserve the native plant communities within the shoreline jurisdiction, actually, or is probably better, or critical areas and their buffers. So this would apply to critical areas and their buffers, but not anything that's not a critical area or buffer or that's not within the shoreline jurisdiction.
Okay, yeah, I guess I'm following. And that's essentially what that we had proposed before. We just said within, yeah, we said within designated critical areas. So I think, yeah, that makes sense. And that's kind of already what we do in the critical areas code. So I follow that now. Thanks.
I just want to interrupt for just a moment. When we're doing screen sharing, it's a little harder for me we make some of our planning commission decisions by consensus where it's a simple thing like this. And I don't have a good view of everybody on the screen. So if I'm thinking we have consensus and you disagree with that, please put your hand up, Commissioner. So I'm trying to avoid voting on everything when we already agree on the change. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody.
Well, I'm concerned about the wordsmithing here, about the use of or there. Is it clear that and their buffers applies to both shoreline jurisdictions and critical areas in this language?
How's that? And/or?
And someone who's more of a wordsmither than me, wait, I was thinking either shoreline jurisdiction or critical areas and their buffers, but I don't know if that's better.
Well, because you might have critical areas in the shoreline jurisdiction too, so.
Oh.
Go ahead, Brian.
The shoreline jurisdiction does not have a buffer. It's only critical areas that have buffers.
Okay, got it. That now it works for me.
All right. Go ahead, John. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, John, continue. Sorry, Commissioner Mayberry.
Oh, I'm good with this language, so I make the motion to make the change unless it's already on the table here.
I second it, and I kind of thought that maybe that was needed to get into discussion on in-depth discussion on these items, unless we all just agree we want to talk about all of them.
Yeah, I think if there's general consensus, because you guys will eventually, well, hopefully you'll take a tentative action on this whole thing like you've done the other chapters, and you're going to take a final action on the S&P after, you know, all the documents after your public hearing. So.
And Cliff, that was what I was doing, is it seemed like we had a consensus, and that's why I asked if I believe we have a consensus from what I'm seeing on the screen, and you disagree with it, please raise your hand and let me know. But John, let's move on to your next one then. Sorry, Commissioner Mayberry.
So are we not going to vote on each one of these changes? Is that the?
Well, I
think we should. Chair, I'd like to raise that. I think it's appropriate that's the way we've dealt with other changes. At least it seems that way to me.
Okay. And I am good with a motion. So Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead and make the motion.
I make the motion to strike associated with marine, river, or lake shorelines and wetlands and replace it with the language within shoreline jurisdiction and or critical areas and their buffers.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Do we have discussion? Seeing there's no one has comments or discussion. Yeah. Tammy, would you go ahead and take the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmonte,
Yes,
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
7-0, that carries.
Okay. Commissioner Mayberry, would you please continue?
Okay, can we move to 16.16.255.c.3?
Okay, so we're under critical areas assessment reports, and C talks about what the report shall contain. All right, go ahead.
So the motion would be to strike 3. And the reason I've got here is that WDFW already covers areas for habitat corridors and habitat for salmon and forage fish as habitat conservation areas. And this language will be redundant and run the risk of implying CAO requirements expand outside intended areas. And again, I'd like to get Ed to explain his concern with that if possible.
I would, excuse me just a moment. Commissioner Desmonte.
I'm sorry. I'm hoping to speak after Ed speak.
And then please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, pretty much like John said, coming from my perspective as a practitioner and no one has to write these reports, there's a lot of stuff that goes in there, and it's always more challenging if things get added in that are vague and not defined necessarily. And ecological connectivity is very, very general. Habitat corridors too, it can mean a lot of different things. And especially so the state has actually defined habitat corridors as a priority habitat. And so that is included in the HCA section already, and if present should be included in the report. And the same goes for salmon and forage fish. Those are all included as priority species and habitats, again, within the HCA section. So it seems like we already have this in there. It's already required in reports. So again, this would be just adding more language that is a little more vague. So that was my concern with this. That's all I got.
Commissioner Desmonte, go ahead.
I'm wondering if it would be beneficial to keep this only as an informational component, because meaning specifying that this as provided by DFW. And the reason is only because that someone reviewing the code would recognize that that's being done in the code, but by reference. I don't know if that would be helpful or not, but that's my only comment to keep it.
Cliff, did you have a comment there?
I know, but I wanted to hear from Ryan because he deals with dealt with these more often than I.
Well, I mean, habitat corridors and then creating connectivity between habitat patches is a priority that's in a lot of our documents. Yet Fish and Wildlife has it. Ecology is now looking more into it when you do your wetland science, your wetland reports. They're basing buffers off of having a 100-foot corridor. And so it's important, and also council asked us to address it through our update of the CAO. And so this addresses what council asked us to do as well. It doesn't add a new regulatory layer. It just reminds people that they're supposed to be talking about this in their reports. And I know, Ed, that they're in yours, but they're not in every one that we get.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I think the additional concern here was that we would be identifying impacts to areas that are not critical areas of their buffers, but maybe the potential of an area that's not in a buffer, but that maybe deer walk through or frogs hop through. I don't know. I think that was the concern about now creating language that expands beyond the critical areas, shorelines, or their buffers.
Commissioner Desmani.
I was just noticing that the heading though specifically refers to the critical areas assessment report shall.
Yes, I guess I got a question for Ryan or Cliff. Could a habitat corridor or ecological connectivity be located outside of a critical area or their buffer?
Yes, they could. The critical area report is limited to 300 feet with around a development area.
But it could connect to buffer areas or critical areas, and so we'd have to be identifying impacts to ground that is not in a critical area or their buffer with this language.
You have to identify these impacts, correct? And so as Ed can speak to you even more than me, but when you do your rating forms and you are required to look in a 1 kilometer circle around and doing some of your assessments, which kind of ties into habitat connectivity in getting your rating for your wetland. Ecology is also looking at the size of your buffer based upon habitat having corridors present, and you can reduce some of your buffers if you have that corridor present. And so it ties into it. So you would be looking at 300 feet around your development to see how that development would be impacting that corridor within that area. And so are you know, and the idea is that if you have a parcel and you go 300 feet, there's a corridor on the right-hand side, and that's where you want your building. Can you move it over to this side? Because you're going to have an impact. And if you have an impact, you're going to mitigate for it. So I guess it would extend it outside of that. I don't remember if we put the corridors as an HCA or not.
The habitat corridors are, however, the council has only identified one, and that's the Chuckanut Wildlife Corridor. I know that the Wildlife Advisory Committee has it on their long-term agenda to potentially look to see if there are more, but at this point we just have basically that big blob up in the Chuckanut Mountains is identified as an official habitat corridor, though there may be connectivity between wetlands or something like that, but not a corridor per se, but it is still connected.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I guess I still just have the concern that this could be interpreted differently because both of those terms are vague.
Well, no, they're defined in the HCA section.
And the GMA also requires counties to regulate, manage, preserve habitat corridors between urban growth areas. So, I mean, technically the GMA requires us to be looking at this as well. We just don't have identified as a particular critical area, but we're supposed to be managing those.
Can I jump in here, please?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if Ed could talk.
No, corridors is defined as a critical area because it's a priority habitat. It's listed in the state priority habitats list. I don't have the copy on me, but they actually define it. It's it's a priority habitat. So it is by definition a critical area, and it is included within the HCA section. So it is supposed to be addressed in reports, and it doesn't. I know we've identified the Chuckanut corridor, but again, as defined by Department of Fish and Wildlife, you could put it, as you guys are talking about, on any project. And I think this is my concern is there's already, and even discussing this, there's a lot of confusion about what the habitat corridor is. So I think pointing back to that priority habitat section might clear that up, because again, the state has defined this. So if you wanted to, you know, keep this language, and I can appreciate that you want to point to that, I think we could include a reference to that, so that, you know, we know there is one definition and the state has already done that. That makes sense?
Commissioner Gasmani.
So does staff see any negative impacts from, based on the prior discussion on creating this number 3 as a referential item rather than as its own kind of deliverable?
Oh, I have my hand up.
Ryan?
Yeah.
Ryan?
No, I don't mind. I don't see my only about doing with WFW, but also recommend that we add in or as approved by council, because the Wildlife Advisory Committee is going to be bringing forth their assessment of corridors within Whatcom County. And so if the county council decides to approve that wildlife management paper in some sort or another, then I think they should be able to identify their own corridors within their own jurisdiction.
So how about if we just say identify that same sentence, but at the end tack on as identified in whatever the 16, 16, 7, 10. Because it does list all the things that council wanted to protect.
I like that.
Commissioner Gasmani.
Is there, Chair, is there a motion on the table?
No, there's not.
Then may I make a motion with this amendment to item 3?
You can make the motion, yes.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion to modify item 3 as shown on the screen by adding as identified in WCC 16.16.710.
I would second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, can we get the language on 16, 7, 10? I don't know if how much of it.
It's a long one, but here it is. So HCA's shall include surface waters of the state, areas with federally listed species, area in which state listed priority species are found, state priority habitats and the areas associated with state priority species, areas in which state listed rare plants are found, areas in which state listed saltwater critical areas are found, areas in which state listed freshwater critical areas are found, certain ponds, certain natural areas defined by WDNR, or portions of the San Juan National Monument. Frequently flooded areas are subject to FEMA's NIMFS buyout. And then species and habitats of local importance. And at this point, there's only the habitats are the marine nearshore habitat, the Chuckanut Wildlife Corridor, and then that just says we're going to maintain a list of that. And then there's a process by which somebody can nominate species or habitats of local importance. But nobody has done that yet, though my understanding is the Wildlife Advisory Committee may be taking that on at some point in their life.
Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead, continue.
Yeah, no, that sounds good to me. So I'll support that.
Okay.
Right, is there any other discussion on the motion? Seeing no other hands raised for discussion, Tammy, would you take the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Yes,
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
7-0 carries.
All right, now we're going to 6:30. 6:30C. So we're on.
I think it's B, unless it got changed. Yeah, it's B there.
Oh, yeah, it's because some of the numbering got changed. So I tried to fix them in your thing where I found them, but I may have missed some.
Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead.
Okay, so the motion here, and this actually applies to two sections of the code. They're identical language, but we can do them separately just so that you guys can see them. But the motion would be to retain the language that are functionally and effectively disconnected from the wetland by an remove of and retain road or other. And the reason for that is, as of now, at least the way I understand it, wetland buffers don't extend past an already hardened structure that there is no connectivity between the two. And the concern would be there would be substantial buffers that would extend into properties and consequences for those landowners without any real benefit to the wetlands. And Ed, if Ed could maybe talk just a little bit, he's probably got some examples of how this would affect property owners.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's several aspects to this. This would have some huge changes all across the county. You know, obviously roads have been built all over the county over the last 100 years. And in many cases, you know, wetlands, including large wetland systems, are up against the roads. And that just happened by nature. A lot of times roads act like dams and things back up behind them. This, you know, and extending buffers over the roads, I mean, while there might be some habitat functions that you might have across roads, it really is going to vary from situation to situation. And if you apply this to every wetland, especially in light of the buffer table changing in that we will have some larger buffers, you will have that one stroke non-conforming use all over the county that people are just not aware of. And I would say also that even the code, two things, the code section that we have now does leave a little bit of wiggle room for staff, because it says not include areas that are functionally and effectively disconnected. So if staff could make the case that there's a road there, but it doesn't functionally or effectively disconnect the wetland, then they could extend the buffer over the road. And that might be, again, more surgical than just extending every buffer for every single wetland over the road or a building or structure. The other thing I would add too is that this language was adopted the last time we updated the code, and ecology was involved with that, and they approved this as well. And the guidance that we're talking about isn't new. This is all older stuff, so I don't think anything's changed with respect to ecology. And again, they were okay with it before, so I think that's my main points here.
Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
I think our staff report was pretty accurate. I mean, as Ed just said, it's not new guidance. Of course, I mean, ecology was involved in drafting up our ordinance last time. I've been doing this work here, not as long as Ed, but for about 15 years in Washington State. And I didn't know that section of the ecology's analysis. I always assumed that the way that the regulations were written in every jurisdiction that I worked in prior to becoming a regulator was following the guidance. And it always said that, buffer zone extend across functionally designated areas such as roads. But when you read the ecology guidance, it says for that road project, it may not extend across the road, but if you build something on the other side, it may extend across the road to protect those functions of those wetlands. And I was very surprised when I read that, which is why I recommended that we change it.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that this is a pretty big change, and we'll expand buffers in a lot of areas that we didn't have them before. Again, for likely limited gain for protecting wetlands. So I want to make the motion to basically retain the existing language from B, I believe.
Yes, 1616-630B, and same thing in 1616-740A1.
Correct. So yeah, motion is to retain existing language with the exception of the LY that you put after substantial. It's just better English.
Commissioner Desmani.
I think I'll wait for a second first and then I comment.
Okay. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner Desmani.
So I'd like to ask if this is the kind of thing that could trigger a culvert replacement project?
Can you explain that a little bit more?
So imagine a road that is acted like a dam, and that there's a potential. There might be some kind of culvert or something like that present, and then this kind of a designation could trigger the need for the culvert to be replaced by a bridge.
It wouldn't trigger the need for the replacement. It would require potentially more mitigation for the activity. Is that about right, Ed?
Yeah, I don't think those two things are really related to what we're talking about here, but yeah, I think Ryan's answer is a good one. I don't think this would trigger a culvert replacement in any way. We're just talking about buffers on either side of the road, but Ryan's response in that if you did replace a culvert, you would have more mitigation because you'd be mitigating for a buffer on the other side of the road from the wetland.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, is there any more discussion? Any questions? Tammy, are you able to read that back to us?
Okay.
I asked Tammy to read this back to us. Just make sure
So,
we have it.
okay, the motion in 1616-630 is to look at 1616-630B, 1616-720A1.
740 now.
Oh, 740, thank you.
Yeah, so just so the commission knows, I had noticed that some of the numbering was off. And since we're getting ready to reissue for a public review period, I updated the numbering. So that's why we're having a little confusion here. I'm sorry about that, but
thank you.
I have to issue these all tomorrow, so I had to get it done ahead of time.
You're lucky Natalie's not on.
No, I think it was her comment that made me realize that some of them were off, so.
All right, go ahead, Tammy, and continue.
Okay, so in those two sections, it's to retain the existing language that are functionally and effectively disconnected from wetland by an. Also remove of, retain road or other, and I believe remove the ly in substantially. Was that, or
I
add?
think it was,
Retain ly.
I know, retain ly, thank you. And retain ly. Okay.
thank you. Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
No,
Commissioner Hanson,
No.
Commissioner Lund,
No.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
4-3, that carries.
Okay, so we're changing it back except for the ly, is that right? That was the motion? Well, I'll fix it tomorrow. I'll just put a note for now. Review. Sweet.
Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead.
Okay, as soon as Cliff's done there, I'd like to move to 16.16.640.a.5.
Okay, almost there with you. All right, 16.640. 640. A5. Okay, there's that, and 745 A2. Oh, damn, wrong one, sorry. 745 A2. Okay.
Oh, so motion would be to strike both of those sections. Reasoning being that adjacent priority habitats are already accounted for in the wetland rating form and will likely result in a double counting towards buffer requirements. So the way I understand it is if wetlands are within certain distance of each other, that it increases the score of those wetlands. And so having this language in here could end up having a double counting of it. And Ed can probably explain that a little better than I can. So if Ed, if you could talk on it for a little bit.
Sure. So this is an added section that we don't have in the current code. And I guess there's two parts that I would point out with this. The one John was just speaking to, when we do a wetland rating form, a third of, or one of the big components is the habitat score of the rating form. The habitat score is one of the main components that determines the buffer on the buffer tables. And so in the scoring of the habitat score, actually a bulk of the score is the wetland within proximity to other priority habitats. So any other priority habitat or fish or stream or anything like that. So if there's any of those within 330 feet, we have to tabulate those and the score goes up. We also have to, we also have to map all of the habitat within a kilometer of the wetland, and the score is based on that. So the more habitat within a kilometer of the wetland, both connected and disconnected, increases the score. So if the wetland is in proximity to other priority habitats and other habitat in general, the habitat score is higher, and thus the wetland will require a bigger buffer. So that's kind of what I'm saying here. And then, so then on top of that, to say, you know, if you have a wetland that had a high habitat score, requires a big buffer, if that wetland is within 300 feet of another priority habitat, which you've already accounted for, you can increase the buffer. Seems like double dipping to me. Also, just in general, I mean, it's a little bit vague. And when I read this, if I have a wetland with a 100-foot buffer, and then there's another wetland 300 feet away with a 100-foot buffer, I can just connect the wetlands and add another 100 feet of buffer. That's the way I read this, which again, it would be difficult to predict. And again, potentially adding a lot more buffer areas that I guess are outside of defined critical areas right now. That's my concern. That's all I got there.
Commissioner Lund.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on process as we go through these, that it would be good to have a motion and a second, and then commissioner discussion before we invite attendees. In my opinion, I think that would be the proper order, and then we could invite the attendees. Mr. Miller has had a chance to submit his comments via letter. Staff has responded. I think we've all read that. Resources and FutureWise on this particular one has also offered comment. Carly's on the line. If we needed, we could invite her to explain their response. But I kind of feel like just to streamline as we go through this before we just invite discussion, there should be a motion and a second first.
I'll accept that as a point of order. Okay. Commissioner Hanson.
Well, I'm in support of the previous comment, and I have something to say once we start proper discussion following the second.
Did he make a motion?
I don't know if that was an actual motion or if he introduced it.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I get the rules, or the rules of order. I think it has been working fairly well, because some of these motions have kind of morphed into something that's maybe works better through the discussion without having a motion on the table, but I'm fine doing it that way. So I'll make a motion to strike 16.16.640.a.5, as well as 16.16.745.a.2.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? We don't have a second, so, and we don't have a motion. Commissioner Hanson.
So I'm trying to take my hand down. Since we don't have a motion, I'm not going to comment on it.
Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead. Better click bring down meeting.
I think we're there. I think it's B2, this one.
Yes, sorry, I was muted there for a minute.
And this one.
Yeah, 645.b2. So the motion is to strike these two sections. Reasoning being this section, the way it's written, eliminates the intent of buffer averaging and only allows for it when combined with additional mitigation. It's going to end up increasing the cost of simple projects and reduce the predictability when applying for a permit. So I believe I made a motion was to strike those two sections.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? So we don't have a second, so we won't have a motion. Cliff, a question for you.
Yes,
The color of that yellow on the screen,
yes.
I really can't read it.
Um,
There's nothing to do for that.
yeah, I can change it all to black and white. Would that be better for you?
I'm not sure if it'd be better, but I just can't read that yellow very well. So
Sure. Let me try that. I don't have control over the colors that get generated. So. Okay, so we're moving on.
yeah, sure.
640C1C. So, so this is under buffer width reduction. And we're saying that moderate low impact land use projects may apply, may be reduced when the following occur. And the one we're talking about is the buffer shall not be reduced to less than 75% of the required buffer. And the other part of that is C1 745 C1C. Same language down here.
So the reason for retaining the existing language, which I don't know if staff has the ability to let us read that, but the reason to go back to the original language is that the new language doesn't take into account wetland category, and it eliminates the larger buffer reduction potential on low value wetlands. Concern being some of the low value wetlands, many property owners are surprised that they're even considered wetlands. So, Ryan, you got the.
I just have an anecdotal little comment. So buffer reduction sections are very common throughout a lot of CAOs, but what I found very interesting when I actually read basically cover to cover of the recommendations from ecology for wetlands, buffer reduction isn't even one of the options that they recommend. They only recommend averaging and increasing. So that's a very interesting thought process that this buffer reduction is even in the recommendations from our state.
Commissioner Mayberry, did that answer your question?
Sure. Well, not really, but so I'm gonna make a motion to replace with the existing language on those two.
Commissioner Masseri.
Gotten a little bit lost just because I'm looking at 3 different documents referring to the same thing. Which one of these of yours, Commissioner Mayberry? What number are we looking at?
We're on number
1616 640 C1C.
correct. Number 6.
Okay, thanks.
And Cliff,
And-
what we had as a motion was made to replace it with the existing language. And I think we're getting a little confused. Is the existing language up on the screen now?
No, I think our existing language said it shall not be reduced more than 50%. Let me see if I can find where that was.
Our existing code is that if it's a category 4, I believe it used to be 3 or 4, but it's 4 can be reduced by 50%, whereas categories 2 and 3 can be reduced by 75%.
Yeah, so there it is. This is the old language here that Ryan was just talking about. So if you're a 1, 2, 3 category, you can't reduce less than 75% or 50 feet, whichever is greater. And if it's a Cat 4 wetland, not less than 50% or 25 feet, whichever is greater.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, so the point was it's the category 4 wetlands that get the change here. They can only be reduced by 25% instead of 50. I'd like maybe staff to give an example of what a category 4 wetland is, if that's possible.
Mayberry, can you hold this for a second? So what we have is one Commissioner Mayberry has tried to make a motion, and we didn't have all the language on the screen, and I think some still have questions about what the motion is exactly. I just want to make sure that everybody's clear with what the motion is, and then what we need to have is a second coming after that. And I'm not 100% certain. I know that to replace it with the existing language, but I don't think we're all certain what that is. Commissioner Desmani.
I'll second it for the purpose of discussion.
Okay. Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead.
Yeah, what the motion does, the existing language, all it really affects is it takes a category 4 wetland and it allows up to a 50% reduction of the buffer or 25 feet, whichever is greater. The category 1 through 3, they're still at a maximum of 25% buffer reduction.
Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, I got a question for staff. So in the memo, it states that per DOE, we can only do the 75%. My understanding, they've approved our current one that has the 50%. Did they miss that, or something changed, or why were we out of compliance if we are?
Guidance came out in 2016. We had already been through this process, and their guidance document is that you don't reduce it less than 25% if you use their tables and you have wildlife habitat corridors. So I mean, there's a bunch of ifs, but they basically came out with don't reduce it more than 25%.
75, not 25.
Now,
or
if you
reduce
it by 25%,
yeah.
you have to maintain 75%.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think they would reject it if we don't change this language?
Well, ecology doesn't approve this document. Well, I mean, they approve it for the shoreline, so they may not approve it for the shoreline, but they don't approve this at the CAO. It goes to the State Department of Commerce, who then issues it out to a bunch of agencies, and they give you a lot of feedback. We've already met with the Department of Ecology, and they've already agreed that what we have changed meets their guidance, including what we just changed about the buffer going across the road. But they've already looked at it once. I don't know what the Department of Ecology will do with their Shoreline Master Program if they would not accept this. They may not accept this in the Shoreline Master Program, but it could still be applied outside of that.
And realize that the Department of Ecology staff is sitting in on your meeting right now, will be a part of your hearing when it comes up. So they'll be sitting as one of your members.
I needed to ask Ryan a question here. You mentioned 2016 about this document or the previous document, but wasn't that approved in 2017?
We'd already started the process, and we were told to keep moving.
Okay.
We did not, in the document that we used in Whatcom County for updating our code was actually the guidance document for small cities, because at that time ecology said that it was appropriate. We also did not update to larger buffer sizes at that particular point in time either, due to directives to get the CAO updated and move on forward, because we'd already gone through this part of the process. We'd already gone through the technical advisory committee. We'd already gone through the citizens advisory committee, and we were sitting in planning commission when this guidance came out, and we were asked to just keep moving forward and we'll fix it later. And now it's later. And so it's in front of you now.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I just want to point out that ecology will be fine with anything that we put in here that's more than we need to do. So when statements are made that ecology is good with this language, it doesn't mean that we can't back off of it a little bit.
That's true.
Commissioner Masseri.
So just to confirm though, the 25% reduction though, that is per ecology.
Yes. So if you read the 2016, I pulled it up over here. It's called Wetland Guidance for CAO Updates, Western Washington version, June 2016. They give you tables and they say if you do this, then you can get a 25% reduction. If you don't, then you don't. They don't specifically come out and say that you can only reduce it by 25%. Because if you read ecology's guidance for best available science, they don't have a reduction section. It's just averaging or a variance. That's all they have. There's no administrative reduction of 50% at all anywhere. There's no reduction at all in their guidance. The only thing you have to go on is if you do have these things that they ask you to do, you get 25% reduction. Everything else is a variance.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I keep hearing the word guidance, and I just want to be clear. And maybe this is just a question for staff, but is guidance the same thing as a requirement? Because if it was a requirement, why wouldn't we just take whatever language that ecology drafts up and just put it in here and not have to argue about it?
So ecology bases their guidance document in the CAO, they call it guidance, is based on their opinion of best available science. If you go outside of their guidance, you are required to come up with your own best available science to go away from their guidance. In the Shoreline Master Program, their poor words used in the 1970s, they came out with these guidelines as a term of art for the Shoreline Master Program. It says in the RCWs that the Department of Ecology shall create guidelines for local jurisdictions to update and create shoreline master programs. But then they codified those guidelines as WACs, which is in essence a mandate. And so in the SMP, the ecology has line item veto over your regulations. They can strike out words, they can strike out sentences, and then they'll send you a letter that says you're required to make these changes and we suggest you make these other ones. When it comes to the CAO, Department of Ecology is not in charge of it. The Department of Commerce is in charge of your CAO update because it's underneath the GMA, which is regulated by Department of Commerce. Ecology is only a commenter at that particular point in time. That's why you have two different things. If you get taken to court by somebody and they say you're not meeting best available science because this is what the state has defines best available science, you have to come up with your own science on why you didn't follow their guidance.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hanson.
I guess from my perspective, if we're going to have standards lower than the guidance, that we should have the best available science to support those reduced standards, and hardships to people who want to develop property wouldn't necessarily be the criteria that we're looking for. What we'd be looking for is that it isn't going to make any difference in terms of the net loss of ecological functions. And since we're in kind of a tough position in terms of losing these ecological functions on a large scale in this world and in this county, I'm pretty hesitant to try to loosen things up, particularly since as all the better properties are developed, there'll be more and more marginal properties that people wanted to develop. So if we start loosening our standards, we're just creating a slippery slope in that regard.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I was just wondering if we could get Ed to give us an example of what a category 4 wetland is, since that's all we're really talking about.
Ed, would you go ahead, please?
Sure. Category 4 wetlands under the current ecology rating form are actually not very common. Most often they would be sloped wetland systems that are mowed or hayed. So there's little to no vegetation, and probably they have no water quality inputs to them, no stormwater runs to them, so they don't have the opportunity to clean water. And then they're also not in proximity to a stream or another priority habitat. So most often it would just be a small mowed lawn that's either out in the middle of a field or in someone's yard. That's the only time I really see those.
Thank you. Commissioner Desmani.
Yes, so I'd like to also hear from resources, see if they have a comment on this particular subject.
Do we have someone here from resources? Is Carly?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Yep, this is Carly Deathridge. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Carly Deathridge with Resources. I don't have anything else to add beyond what staff has been sharing and what Commissioner Hansen added. You know, I think. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. So, thanks for calling on me, though.
Okay. Ryan, you have your hand up. Ryan Erickson, go ahead.
And also, I'd just like to remind everybody that I know it's a new process and.
Hold on just a second, Ryan.
Yeah.
Your feet's been getting quieter. I don't know if you can, if the mic's not close enough to you. Just wanted to let you know.
Okay, how's this?
Seems a little better. Go ahead.
Okay. So it's 75% in this section. However, if you meet the variance criteria, administratively, we can reduce anybody down to 50%, down by 50%. So while we used to just do everything administratively down by 50% for category 4, if you meet the requirements of you need it because it's causing you a hardship, you can get it down to 50% just by applying for it administratively. It doesn't go to the hearing examiner. It's done internally.
Do we have any other questions or comments? All right. Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
No.
Commissioner Desmani,
No,
Commissioner Hansen,
No.
Commissioner Lund,
No.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
No.
Commissioner Barton.
Abstain.
Okay, so 1 yes, 5 ayes, and 1 abstaining, so that fails.
All right, the next section from Commissioner Mayberry's motions was basically in the same section, but let's see, C1E3. So this language here, retention of existing native vegetation on other portions of the site in order. So this is to minimize impacts when we reduce them. The director may require any or all of these, one of which is retention of existing native vegetation on other portions of the site in order to offsite habitat loss from buffer reduction. And I think the same language is in 745 C1F3. C1F3. Yeah, same language down here.
Commissioner Mayberry.
So my concern with this is that it could require you to retain existing native vegetation again outside of critical areas or their buffers. So if it simply, instead of on other, maybe, I was originally just wanting to strike this, but if the language could somehow say retention of existing native vegetation on other portions of the site within critical areas or their buffers, I think it would read better.
Though that already has to occur.
So adding this language then could enable staff to require retention of whatever native trees you have on your property, regardless of whether they're associated with a wetland.
And can I ask Ryan a question? It might shed some light, Ryan.
So,
Well, I just wanted to ask, was it your intention that we may require planting outside of the buffers or the critical areas, or just in other portions of the critical areas or buffers?
so you're not allowed to reduce an area of a buffer that's already been averaged. And mixing them together doesn't happen. What this intent of this is as part of your mitigation toolbox, you could, it does say may require it. I understand where the concerns are lying now that I'm reading this a little bit differently, but the idea was that to offset your habitat loss from buffer reduction, you could extend basically average your buffer up to protect like a significant grove of trees as part of your offset of your mitigation for reducing the buffer. So it allow you to do like buffer reduction and buffer averaging at the same time.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Could there be some language that limits the requirements, say just from a square footage? So say you're having your buffers reduced by 100 square feet, but the retention of existing native vegetation outside of the critical areas buffer would then be 100 square feet, as opposed to just this kind of vague, we might just make you keep all your trees regardless of where they land on the property.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that in order to retain it and to no greater area or function than that is that which is lost or something like that. I mean, it's supposed to be it's a may, and it's supposed to be something in the toolbox. But I can see where it's reading in this section that it sounds more like, because like the first two ones are more, you may be directed by staff to do them, right? Whereas that third one down there, I don't know if it should be a directive. You know what I'm trying to say?
Right, I guess I'd feel more comfortable, and I don't have the language for it. I don't know, maybe if you throw something on there.
Cliff, can you put a thought box on that for us to go over?
Well, I may have a solution for you. Rather than staff may require, what if it were the applicant may propose any of the following?
Yeah, the first two ones, staff wanted to be able to say, hey, you have to do this. But that third one down there, I agree. That one should be, I think, it's kind of one of those give and takes. And I mean, I know where the concern is. I want to satisfy that concern with some language.
All right, then if it's all right with the Planning Commission, will you let Ryan and I work on some potential language that would solve it?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that, please.
It wasn't meant to like, you've got mature, you've got a grove of trees way over here. You got to preserve it. It wasn't that intent. And so I want to make sure that it doesn't get overused. I agree with the sentiment. So
Works for me.
Okay, we'll do that. All right, the next one down was 640 C3. C3, let's see, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this paragraph and 745 C2. C2 and this, so same language in both places, one's for HCA, one's for wetlands, and basically says, in all circumstances where a portion of the remaining buffer is degraded, the buffer reduction plan shall include replanting with native vegetation in the degraded portions of the remaining buffer area and shall include a 5-year monitoring and maintenance plan.
Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead.
So the concern with this one, and this would affect, I think, primarily agricultural ground, or ground that maybe was just a hay field in the back and someone wanted to put a house on it. 3/4 of it could have been within a critical area buffer and it just been in a hay field. And just because of someone wanting to put a house on that piece of property, they could end up having to plant the rest of their 10, 20 acres in trees. There's no limit on it. So again, I don't know, maybe this was kind of a similar intent or not the intended language here, but it would be good, I think, if there was a limit on it. And maybe staff, if you could explain what the intent here was, that would be nice.
So that's already in the code in another section. And it's also straight from ecology's guidance, the fact that their buffers that they have in their tables are based upon a fully vegetated, densely vegetated functioning buffer. The idea here is that if you reduce the buffer, you have to replant the portion of that buffer that's been reduced. I see here though that it does say all the remaining buffer that is degraded shall be planted, and I did not intend that if you have 3 acres worth of buffer and you reduce 1,000 square feet, you have to plant 2 acres of buffer. So we should fix that.
So same thing, I think, because I get your point better now too, Commissioner Mayberry. Oops. So we'll work on that one as well. I agree, there should be some sort of limit to that. Shouldn't be wide open. Okay.
Continue
Better
on.
buy a tree farm.
I was just going to say, I mean, you used a 3-acre example, but it could be a 40-acre example. So
It could be. Ed uses a lot. He says with our new, he has an example that he's given to me before where you have a moderately small size wetland, and then with all the buffers now, you have acres of buffers off a little wetland. So
Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead.
I was just wondering if we can move on to the next one related to the ratios.
I'm already there. So this is 680C4. It has to do with mitigation ratios.
Okay, so the reason on this one, just talking with Ed, I completely understand the reasoning for wanting to have the mitigation done before the impact, and then wanting to have penalties for rule breakers. But in talking with Ed, he he made the point that most of this mitigation, planting trees, it's done in a fairly short window of time, just from the likelihood of tree survival, fall to spring, basically. And what this could end up doing is making either the project applicant is just going to bite the bullet and go for the 1 1/4, or they'll end up having to wait to do their construction project, and we could end up having concentrated construction time in the county as opposed to spreading it out over the year. So I originally wanted to completely strike this out, but I guess I'd be more comfortable with it if, instead of it just saying before the impact occurs, to maybe just say within a year of the impact. Because they think there's going to be some unintended consequences of requiring mitigation before the project actually starts.
Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, a question for Commissioner Mayberry. Would that be a year of the project commencement? So as essentially you need to capitalize on the first available planting season that you encounter? Or are you thinking, or is that from project completion? Because those could be different timelines.
Yeah, I think commencement would be fine. I mean, really, you're just trying to capture that first available planting window.
Commissioner Desmani.
I'm just wondering, is there a way to kind of reverse this and maybe make an incentive for getting it done before construction instead of a disincentive for later?
Well, I don't know, isn't the incentive that you have a lower ratio?
Ryan Erickson, go ahead. I see your hand.
All right, so there's two things. So C is for those people who violate. We've actually doubled that in A. A is supposed to account for the fact that if you remove a couple 80-year-old trees and you replant with 1 foot saplings, it takes time to grow back up to those functions that you lost from the larger vegetation. And our current code is a 1-to-1. 1-to-1 doesn't account for temporal loss, just in general of the fact that of mitigation. And just throw a wrench into everything else too. We have hard numbers in here because honestly, it's easier to regulate. It's easier also for Ed to write the reports because it's consistent and everybody knows what to expect. But there are a number of staff at Whatcom County who have asked us not to put ratios in at all. So, and to do it more on a case-by-case basis. So that's also out there as well.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Just to keep this moving, I'll make the motion to include the language. Basically make the motion to replace after with within a year. Of.
It'd be in B, wouldn't it?
Is that what you mean?
Yes.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Hanson.
A question for staff. is there some sort of bond or surety that would be placed on the mitigation to ensure that it happens? And that if there's adaptive management required, say the trees die or what have you, is that already written into the code or regulations?
It is. Mitigation sites, we have a 5-year monitoring program on them.
We have the assignment of savings that we hold to make sure that it is successful. So the way I read 4A, it says where the mitigation is placed within 1 year of the impact occurring at a 1 to 1, at a 1 to 2, a 1 1/4 to 1 ratio. Wasn't the intent that if you do it within 1 year, you only have to do 1 to 1?
Well, let's turn to Commissioner Mayberry.
That was the intent. Yeah.
So I put it in the wrong line.
Probably, or I put it in the wrong line. How about, okay, hold on. Instead of within, retain after, where mitigation is placed after 1 year of impact occurring, then that'll work.
And I think down here, we have to do the opposite, right? 1 year of the impact. So, does that fix it right?
And then that in B should we say within 1 year, not before 1
Yeah.
year. Is it thanks for, yeah, with it, yeah, because that would include before 1 year. So my next question I have here, and maybe we should wait till after y'all vote, and then I'll pose my question because it's really has to do with construction, home construction. So construction sequencing.
Okay, so well, I've got this, I think how Mr. Mayberry intends it to be, but I don't think that there's been a vote on this.
So hold on.
I'll extend my second.
Cliff Strong. Yes, thank you, Commissioner Desmonte. I was just going to ask if you're okay with that change to the amendment. Okay. Commissioner Hanson.
I'm generally supportive of this, but I'm wondering about what the heck functional means. Because if I plant a couple trees to replace an 80-year-old tree, they're not ecologically functional. So I think there might be a more precise word to get the meaning of what they really want than functional. Maybe I'm not using that word correctly, but anyway, I just want to make that observation.
Yeah, Ryan, do you have a problem with deleting that?
Well, my only concern here now is with advanced mitigation, where you do have it in place and it's functional, and so you get a reduced ratio for it. I'm wondering if we should pull out, if we should have a different
category
for advanced mitigation, which is kind of like what BP does, where they plant stuff 20 years in advance. But that's usually through it. We usually have a contract, if you would, an agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers, and they set their own ratios, and we just agree to them. So since I've got Ed handy and on speed dial, which is kind of nice for this, I think that maybe we should just leave the ratio requirement out of advanced mitigation, Ed, and that way it can just be depending upon the larger project.
Yeah, usually, I mean, a lot of that just applies to wetlands. Buffers are sort of their own thing, but in general, yeah, advanced mitigation, we negotiate lower ratios over time
And so couldn't that be done through this approved habitat management plan?
Right. So,
Yeah.
Loves different ratios.
and I agree with Ed that it's a negotiated ratio, so we shouldn't mandate it to be 1-to-1 for advanced mitigation through a habitat management plan. It should just be whatever we agree to.
Yeah, for buffers, I think it's pretty case by case. I mean, yeah, and advanced mitigation, I think that's fair.
So Chair here, just an answer maybe to the question about the word functional. What about putting the word viable in there?
Yeah, so yeah, what I was gonna be, so I didn't raise my hand.
Go ahead.
So I think, and I'm not don't be putting words in Commissioner Mayberry's mouth, but I think that what he's trying to say is that if you have your plants in the ground in accordance with the mitigation plan by the qualified professional within 1 year of the impact, then it's a 1-to-1 ratio. It doesn't have to be functional; it just has to be installed per plan. And then my comment is, if we're doing advanced mitigation where we're doing it 10 15 years in advance, it should be a negotiated ratio. We shouldn't have a set. It should be based upon functions and values and the overall goals of the advanced mitigation, if that makes any sense. So would you like me to type that up and give it back to you guys?
So are you introducing a new A in here? So
Yeah.
one for advanced mitigation, one for within 1 year, and one for after a year.
Yeah, so one within 1 year, one with after, and then the new C would be advanced mitigation, and D would be if you do retroactive.
Is everybody okay with fixing this right now tonight? So rather than go back.
Okay. Did you hear that?
Real simple.
I think that's far easier, less time.
Copy. Or impacts occurring. So that's advanced mitigation. So we take this out, move that up there. Like that, Brian, were you saying have that a negotiated one?
Yeah, I would say determined by the
habitat management plan.
Well, we're improving it. So I should say at a ratio determined by the functions, values, and goals of the proposed advanced, values of the
Functions, what? Values?
functions and values.
And goals of the advanced plan. I got it right?
Yeah.
You should probably get rid of the parentheses then.
Well, that was just kind of describing what before the impact occurs.
The reason why I put it in parentheses is because, as Ed had mentioned, advanced mitigation is kind of a term used for direct wetland impacts with the core. And you don't necessarily have that with buffers because the core doesn't have buffer requirements, only local jurisdictions do. So that's why I have such as advanced.
I'm going to interrupt you here. Commissioner Mayberry, are you okay with this as a change to your motion?
Yep.
Okay. Commissioner Desmani, you have the second. Are you okay with this?
Sure, let it roll.
We're doing real work here.
Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, so just to clarify on B, where you're saying it's within 1 year of the impacts, again, with a project that is going to have, a longer duration, or any project, I guess, has its own time period. Commencement versus when the project's done is a pretty big, could be a different time scale.
I'm going to ask you to read that yellow part. Okay. Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I would argue that impact means as soon as you cut a tree down or dig a hole in the dirt. So it would be commencement. I don't see any issue with requiring it still being done within a year because I just see it as seasonal. So if you have a year from commencement of the project, you should be able to get trees in the ground.
Yeah, and I think if you say commencement, that's really clear. If you say when the impact's occurring, I could see on a larger development, they say, oh yeah, I'm only going to plant part of mine now because I've only impacted this part. Well, now I'm impacting this part. I have a year for that. I think reading it this way, they might be able to stagger it versus doing it all within the first year.
Which,
Commissioner Mayberry, did you have more to say?
No,
Oh, your hand.
I just think we've been using the word impact here a lot. And to me, impact means as soon as that first impact, it's not the whole thing being done, but I guess it could be interpreted both ways.
Ryan, do you have a change you're recommending?
Well, I just want to point out that these are the standard ratios. And if the habitat management plan, you can write a habitat management plan, which is a little bit more cost from your qualified professional, but they could write in a staging for your project, which could use the 1-to-1 ratio, but you just have to show how you're protecting the environment through that. And so it says, unless the director approves a habitat management plan with different ratios, you shall provide these. So you could create a phasing plan. So
I'm going to interrupt you here, Ryan. I think you're about done, but I'm not seeing any other hands raised to comment on this. So we have a motion and a second. Tammy, would you read the motion back, please?
Okay, the motion is to replace the language in 16-680C4, A, B, and C. A would be where the mitigation is in place and functional before the impact occurs, i.e. advanced mitigation, at a ratio determined by the functions, values, and goals of an advanced mitigation plan. B, where the mitigation is in place within 1 year of the impacts occurring at a 1-to-1 ratio, in parentheses, area or function. And C, where the mitigation is placed after 1 year of the impact at a 1.25 to 1 ratio, in parentheses, area or function.
Thank you. Will you call the roll?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
That carries 7-0.
Okay. The next one is in 710 C1.
Hey, Cliff, I'd like to, I didn't include it in the first motion there, but I'd like to talk about the doubling of the.
Oh, okay, back to where we were.
Right.
Where were we? No, what was it? It was 680. So 4D here.
Correct, yeah. First thing, just since we made changes up there,
Yeah,
not anymore.
Yeah.
But the point I wanted to make was that a lot of people don't realize that they're within critical areas of their buffers when they do things, especially when they get increased on them, like we're doing right now. So I get the purpose of having a punitive requirement in here, but I was wondering if we could think about a little more creative way of looking at it, whether it was done intentionally or not. Just wondering if staff has any thoughts on that. I do think that there should be some kind of increased mitigation requirement if someone just goes out and cowboys something in. But there are going to be a lot of homeowners that have no idea that they're within a buffer, especially if it just got changed, and could end up being really surprised when they come to get a permit for a shed and then get slapped for the porch they put in 5 years ago.
Commissioner Lund, go ahead.
I'm wondering for the scenario that Commissioner Mayberry is describing, replacing the language from shall to may, something along those lines. For retroactive permits, the ratio may be up to double the above ratios or something similar.
Cliff, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't have an issue saying that something along the lines of the director may require up to double the above mitigation, and leave that up to the director to determine. Ryan, you got an issue with that?
No, I don't.
Because I think in general, we don't come down hard on people who did something by accident. It's the folks that do it on purpose that we're more concerned about.
I think I may have had a bad violation experience the day I wrote that.
All right, Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, and this would be for not if a buffer changed and now what they did is in the buffer. It'd be if they should have got a permit for something they didn't, correct?
Yeah, and well, violations go like so if we find a violation 2 years from now, but they did it 3 years ago, then we apply the current rules to them because they didn't come and get a permit, so they're not vested. So that would happen. But if they came and got a permit, it's not a violation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Commissioner Mayberry, does this answer your question?
Yeah, although I'd like it to reference B of the 1-to-1 ratio instead of C. I think requiring a 2-to-1 is probably good enough, as opposed to 2.5. But I'm willing to.
I think Mr. Strong has made that change that you recommended.
Fair enough.
And you still have your hand up. Did you want to talk some more?
No, sorry.
Okay. Commissioner Desmani, go ahead.
So just for clarification, well, it would be up to double, but no less than 1.25, right?
Correct. Well, he changed it to, Mr. Mayberry just said B, so that was at the 1-to-1, so it'd be no less than 1-to-1.
That's why I was asking the clarification question, because I think that if it's retroactive, it's already past, likely to be past 1 year, I guess.
Which is why I had C there, yeah.
No, but what reason that Commissioner Mayberry suggested to get rid of C is because he didn't want to be 2 times 1.25.
Right.
He wanted to be 2 times B, but I'm wondering in the Lee's case, it would still be, I guess it could be just one, if the retroactive permit was filed just after. Let's see, when would it be 1-to-1? I'd like the situation where there's a retroactive permit just after someone builds something, and then if they're getting a 1-to-1 ratio. Well, that doesn't seem quite ideal. I mean, you would think it'd be at least 1.25. That's my thought.
Okay, you guys decide and I'll write the right letter in there.
Commissioner Lund, go ahead.
Well, what we're really trying to do is put a ceiling, and it's a conditional ceiling, and that the director is going to exercise. And so I feel like whether I would suggest leaving it as C the way Cliff has it right now, because it's all going to be up to the director's discretion based on what's happened and how long ago it took place. And we're just defining a maximum.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Lund. I just wanted to have a little bit of discussion as to what an appropriate maximum punishment should be. So if you guys think it's 2.5, then great. I think a 2-to-1 is probably good enough, but that's my opinion.
So we made some changes here, and consensus, is everyone okay with this? These changes?
I think we do need a motion and a second.
Okay. Need someone to make a motion? Commissioner Mayberry.
I'll make a motion to adopt staff's new language on B.
Second.
We have a motion and second. So the motion is to adopt staff's new language on D. So, Commissioner Mayberry.
I have a question for staff for violations, retroactive permits for previous owners. Is there any way that a new owner would end up having to mitigate at these levels for an action of a previous owner?
Frankly, I can't imagine that happening. Typically, these things only happen on the biggest cases where somebody has deliberately gone out and mucked up a wetland or something.
So yeah, they'll be on the hook for doing mitigation, but I don't believe that we would make it double.
It does make me feel a little better now that it's not a shall statement, but can I ask Ed to maybe talk to this just a little bit, see if he has any examples?
Ed, would you go ahead, please?
Sure. I guess when I saw this, my concern is, like John said, in a lot of cases, people have done work on properties where the work actually doesn't necessitate a permit. They might be clearing brush or putting some gravel down or doing a small deck that is below the threshold, but they might have been in a critical area. It might be 5 years earlier. It might be from a prior owner, and at least, 50% of almost every job that comes in now, I have to tell people it's a good chance it's a violation up front. I have some where I was on a property the other day where a guy was building his house and someone cleared some trees in a wetland 15 years ago when the guy was 12 years old, and he's responsible for replanting it. So when I see this, and then you're talking about doubling it on these people when they have no idea, I had concerns. But if there's some discretion, as long as hopefully the director is fair in those cases, I think that's fine.
Okay. Ryan, I know you got your hand up here to talk, unless it's.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was gonna.
Okay.
I left it there on accident.
Sure. Seeing that we have no other commissioners wishing to talk on this issue, Tammy, would you call the roll, and would you read D back for them, please?
Okay, so the motion is to adopt staff's new language on D, which is for retroactive permits, the director may require the ratio to be up to double the ratio in subsection C above.
Okay. Go call the roll.
So Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson, Commissioner Hanson,
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
That carries 7-0.
Okay, moving on, 710C1A5. So this is about the type O waters.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, so this one got a little bit complicated for me. And my goal here was to not have this impact. The primary goal was to not have it impact artificial ponds. But after reading staff's response, and maybe staff, you could explain the purpose of the change here. Explain that to us. This one might not be necessary.
So in this, there's a couple of things going on. The PIC program in our manure ordinance, they regulate it through all ditches basically that drain into our system. And when I was talking to them about our critical areas update, they said, well, no, wait a minute, they're already protected by this ordinance. So 1628 or 26, the manure ordinance says that you can't spray, or liquid manure within a certain distance of a ditch. And a ditch is everything that contains water above and below ground. And then it says that it's enforced through the critical areas ordinance. And so what we're trying to do is I have to have it in the ordinance in order to be able to regulate it, for one. And then two, there are some waters in Whatcom County that have been so modified that they still would fall under what we call a type N now, which don't require such a large buffer. And so they should have a smaller buffer. And so I stole the term type O from, I believe it's King County has a type O system, where it's not part of the state water typing system, but since we use typing to describe our streams, I had to invent something. So this is type other, and it's trying to reduce some of those and make it a 25-foot buffer on those instead of a 50-foot buffer. And where I stole it from in King County, I believe it is, they say if any water that flows off your property, basically, then it's called a type O if it isn't a fish or type N by DNR mapping. But anyways, the PIG managers and who has Department of Ag, George is on the committee too from the Conservation District, they said, well, everything flows into a type F eventually. And so I'm just trying to capture all these different agencies and issues that into one location.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Where would artificial ponds fall in these categories?
So so type O would own. So where do artificial ponds fall? They fall into right now. We have a whole section on them down further, which is we call them, we say lakes. Where is it?
This one here, naturally occurring ponds.
Naturally occurring ponds are man-made ponds and lakes under 20 acres in size.
Created prior to
ag ponds, fire ponds, and storm ponds are defined as HCA areas.
So I know a number of people that have dug little ponds so that they can throw some goldfish or whatever in them, only to realize that they just completely screwed their ability to put up a shed or something. And it really discourages people from doing that kind of activity. So if there is a way to take out the artificial or the man-made ponds, I think that that's something that should be considered.
So I know that we've had discussions with staff, and I don't know if it's probably been discussed in the consultant community too. So there's two ways we can do this. One, you can not put a buffer on an artificial pond, but still regulate it for structures in the pond itself. And so some of our staff members have read the buffer section if you go down, Cliff.
Tell me when to stop.
When we get to the table, where's the buffer table?
It's ways.
There it is. So
Is it
no,
that
no,
one
keep
or
going.
the next one? I think that one.
There. So type F typically is natural streams that are lakes that type F lake is the ones that Fish and Wildlife would regulate. So if you don't need an HPA for your pond, then you wouldn't be a type F lake. So then if you keep going, there should be a natural water.
Oh, that's the length of our table now. Everything else has been deleted.
Oh. Well, then type F lake would be anything that has fish habitat in it. So maybe we should consider those ponds as type O. That's what you asked for, right? Commissioner
Well, I do.
You wanted artificial ponds to be type O.
I do remember that the last time when we updated this in 2016, this was a major point of discussion. And Joel from Fish and Wildlife, I believe, he said that, so they don't allow the creation of these ponds anymore if it's connected to a waterway. But if somebody has done one illegally and it is connected to a waterway with fish in it, then they regulate that pond just like they did the stream that fills it.
Yeah, and then it's the naturalized artificial ponds that I'm thinking of, ones that they dug out and then now they have fish habitat in them, and they would be technically type F lakes.
Right, which is why, where'd that go? Which is why that one line, which is why we had this here, this date, because he said, essentially is when we had our CAO. I mean, we had an earlier version, but it was not as extensive. And so we put a limit on, if there are old ponds created, then yeah, but new ones, they won't allow to be created.
Yeah, the intent of this code was not to put a 100-foot buffer on an artificial pond. If you stock it with some bass, all of a sudden you've got a 100-foot buffer on it. Or if it has habitat value, you may have. So I see the issue in and out. Commissioner Mayberry has his hand up.
Go ahead, Commissioner Mayberry. And when we get done with Commissioner Mayberry, let's have a brief discussion how late we would like to go. Go ahead, Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, my concern isn't so much the ponds that have been created in waterways that are connected to fish-bearing streams. My concern is the pond that someone digs in their front or backyard and just as a little water feature that all of a sudden creates buffers. So I'm wondering where those fall, what category those fall under, and if there's a way to distinguish between a pond that's not connected to salmon bearing streams in any way, that that little water feature that someone may want to put in for a duck or two to land in might not have as big of buffers.
Yeah, so right now artificial ponds would have a 50-foot buffer under our current code. So I think if we put them if we also define them as type O, I think that's fine. I think that's what you asked in your motion. I think that's a good spot for them. If so,
That's exactly what I'm asking for.
yeah.
Okay, so rather than trying to create that, because I think it's going to be a little complicated, I'm going to put a note on here for Ryan and me to work on, if that's okay with the commission.
I now understand I understand what you're trying to do, Commissioner Mayberry.
All right, let's take a pause for a moment. On that note, commissioners, how late would you like to go tonight?
Well, it depends. How many more motions do we have with Commissioner Mayberry and the consultant? Are there any more?
We're on number 10, and he has 14. So we only have 4 more of Commissioner Mayberry's things, and then we have to go over Title 22. I don't think that should take a long time, though. And then the map, and I don't think that should take very long at all. And so we have one more meeting to work on these things before we have your hearing. So I think we could accomplish all that at your next meeting. Unless some of the commissioners have other things they want to raise, but that's all I know that you have on your plate right now.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I think Cliff was looking at Ed's paper here. This is actually my last one.
Oh no, I've had other ones on here from you. It was the one in the memo. I just copied over all your motions and then.
You have it in front of you? Because it's not on my sheet. Pretty sure I had it on one page here.
And none of mine either.
In your memo that I gave you guys?
I'm tracking with what Cliff is saying. There's an 11, 12, 13, and 14.
Oh, good. I'm not going crazy then. Thank you.
In the commission packet, there's.
Hey, Cliff, there's just no proof that you're going crazy in the packet.
So Cliff, so some of these I think got combined. So my numbering system is a little bit different than yours.
Yeah, I think some of them that I put in your memo, because you had listed them all, but I think there's some of the same issues you guys have already dealt with, frankly.
Right.
Now that I'm looking at them.
13 is basically what we're talking about right now. And then 14, we've already, maybe we haven't dealt with it, but it's basically the same ratio language.
Yeah.
That we talked about. Maybe we didn't, maybe we haven't addressed that yet. So I guess it would just be one more if you guys are going to come back with something on the artificial pond thing.
And I guess with the revisions, we're going to want the consultant back. I was just thinking about Ed's time.
I can come back one more time.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I appreciate it though.
Is this a good time to stop the meeting? I would like your input. Commissioner Mayberry.
I think it would be good to address the mitigation ratios again under, I don't think we fixed it. It'd be good to get the language consistent on 16.16.760E.
I would concur. Well,
Okay, let's do that last thing.
Okay, so 760E. 760. So this is, yeah, this is a repeat of that language. I just hadn't combined them, I guess. And if it's the commission's pleasure, since you already agreed to the other language, I can just make this read the same way as you had amended the other.
Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, go ahead and do that, Cliff.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else, commissioners? Shall we adjourn?
So are we done with all your proposed motions, Commissioner Mayberry? In your mind?
That'll do it. I guess outside of the stuff that you guys are gonna put some language towards.
Okay, then Ryan and I will work on those. And then so we'll follow up with that at your next meeting and work on Title 22 and the shoreline map. I think most of those should go fairly quickly. And then you'll have one meeting on other projects besides this one, and then we'll have your hearing in the second meeting in April. Sound good?
Commissioner Desmani, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank the consultant, Miller Environmental, for making this effort to review the codes and address some, these issues. So, and Commissioner Mayberry as well for working with him on getting these motions.
It's all making it better.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate everybody listening and taking the time.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. That felt productive.
Thank you, everybody.
See you guys.
I close out of this now. The heck? Why can't I close this? Oh, stop share. That's why. Leave.